In Cuba, the third round of peace talks between the Colombian government and the National Liberation Army is set to conclude on Friday after the negotiating body requested a 24-hour extension to finalize the agreement. Russia's government accused Ukraine at the United Nations top court of destroying a key dam with artillery strikes and affirmed that Kiev was led by neo-Nazis. In Sudan, 12 people have been killed and thousands injured in bombings over populated areas that the Rapid Support Forces have blamed on the country's army. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. The third cycle of peace negotiations between the Colombian government and the National Liberation Army, the ELN, will conclude on Friday in Havana, Cuba. The closing of the third round of negotiations was first scheduled to be held on Thursday. However, the negotiating body requested a 24-hour extension to finalize the last details of the agreements. The latest round of peace talks began on May 2nd, hosted by the Cuban government and led by Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez Parrilla. In it, both sides stated their hope to reach a ceasefire agreement to end decades of violence in Colombia. President Gustavo Petro announced he will travel to the Caribbean island for the closing ceremony, emphasizing that reaching a ceasefire agreement could mean the beginning of an era of peace for the South American nation.
Tomorrow I'm going to Cuba. I'm going to something that can be very important for the history of Colombia. I'm going to sign a paper that can mean the beginning of an era of peace in this country without any setback. It is going to be difficult, we all know it. More difficult than making war is making peace.
The Prime Minister of Russia, Mikhail Mishustin, ratified on Wednesday Moscow's readiness to expand collaboration with Cuba in strategic sectors such as oil exploitation. During the working meeting in the city of Sochi with his Cuban counterpart Manuel Marrero Cruz, Mishustin expressed that Russia attaches great importance to large joint projects. He also pointed out that bilateral trade last year amounted to almost $730 million and that this year trade grew 9 times as compared to 2022. The minister also recalled that Cuba is an important partner in Latin America and the bilateral cooperation is based on solid traditions of friendship, solidarity, and mutual respect.
We attach great importance to the implementation of large joint projects, mainly aimed at the long term. I'm referring to the increase of oil recovery in Cuban oil fields and the modernization of the metallurgical plant in Havana.
For his part, the Cuban Prime Minister Manuel Marrero expressed his government's interest in expanding and consolidating bilateral relations between Havana and Moscow, which have been uninterrupted since 1960 to date.
Relations have always been at a high level, but in these complex times where the enemies are trying to consolidate their intention to dominate the world, I believe that we are united by many more elements to continue fighting together. I'm referring to the blockade that we have faced.
Iranian President Saeed Ebrahim Raisi will begin a tour of 3 Latin American countries, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba, on Sunday. Raisi will be accompanied by a high-level delegation on this tour, which he is attending at the official invitation of his counterparts and in line with his administration's policy of promoting economic, political, and scientific cooperation with aligned and friendly nations. According to Tasnim News Agency, during the presidential visit to these 3 Latin American nations, Iran is expected to sign several cooperation agreements. The Persian statesman took office in August 2021 and since then has announced plans to improve ties with Latin American and Caribbean countries. Venezuela opened its doors to the performing arts from June 8th to the 18th. The second edition of the International Progressive Theater Festival will feature 106 national and 22 international theater groups. The 10-day encounter has Mexico as the country to be honored. The great novelty of the festival will be Amalivaca, considered the largest puppet of Latin America, which measures 12 meters high, will travel the Mexico Avenue, which crosses the cultural and museum axis of Caracas. According to the director of the Centro Nacional de Teatro, Carlos Arroyo, the presence of 20 international groups speaks of the bed and the opening of the country to exchange visions and postures with other nations. In his opinion, this festival is a platform for the world that opens windows of communication with other nations. On Thursday in the United States, smoke from wildfires in Canada has prompted authorities to issue air quality alerts up and down the East Coast, and people have returned to wear N95 masks, largely abandoned since the pandemic. More than 100 million people across the northeastern United States and extending west to Chicago and south to Atlanta were under pollution warnings after the smoke drifted hundreds of miles from Canada, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency said. The thick pollution delayed flights and forced the postponement of sporting events, and New York City's public schools activities were suspended. Mayor Eric Adams told New Yorkers to limit outdoor activities to the absolute necessities. Devastating fires in Canada have displaced more than 20,000 people and scorched about 3.8 million hectares of land. Around 100 French firefighters and rescue workers departed from Marseille in southern France for Quebec to help fight historic fires in Canada.
Canadians have asked for French reinforcements, and as we speak also European reinforcements, because other countries are going to follow France. We already had a bilateral agreement 4 days ago, and so we are going to reinforce the local firefighters to do what we call in our hard John edge work, since they had 150 fires currently in Quebec, including a major fire, and fires that are not under control, and so we are going to cover large forest edge, and above all to bring a contribution of personnel.
According to Norwegian officials, smoke from Canadian wildfires that have enveloped parts of the US and Canada in a thick haze could arrive on Thursday in Norway. Atmosphere and climate scientists at the Norwegian Institute for Climate and Environmental Research used a forecasting model to predict how the smoke will travel through the atmosphere. Smoke has moved over Greenland and Iceland since June 1st, and observations in southern Norway have recorded increasing concentrations of aerosolized particles. The U.S. East Coast has experienced dangerous levels of pollution from wildfires burning in Canada. Canada has requested assistance in fighting more than 400 fires across the country. Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. All the stories coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. On Thursday, Russia's government accused Ukraine at the United Nations top court of destroying a key dam with artillery strikes and affirmed that Kiev was led by neo-Nazis. The Russian authorities warned the judges of the International Court of Justice that the Zelensky's administration has violated anti-terrorism laws in the current armed conflict. In the meantime, Russian diplomat Alexander Shulgin accused the Ukrainian government of having been installed after a coup d'etat in 2014, claiming they were backed by nationalists, direct descendants of Nazi collaborators. He also said Kiev's regime came to power following violence. Russian diplomat Alexander Shulgin accused Ukraine before judges at the International Court of Justice in The Hague of destroying the Kakhovka Dam with artillery strikes.
In fact, Ukraine did it. The Kiev regime not only launched massive artillery attacks on the dam on the night of June 6th, but also deliberately raised the water level of the Kakhovka reservoir to a critical level by opening the gates of the Dnipro hydroelectric power station.
Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko said that the Ukrainian government is behind the destruction of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant. He also stressed the cautious position of the U.S. At a meeting of the Security Council of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, Lukashenko pointed out that Kiev needed to cover up 3 days of counteroffensive. The comments were highlighted by the Belta news agency. The Belarusian leader underlined the prudent and cautious position of the United States in this regard, and how the White House immediately said that they could not say anything about who did it. In the early morning of June 6, the Ukrainian armed forces attacked the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant. with missiles. According to Russian authorities, the valves of the sluice gates were destroyed, which caused an uncontrolled water spill. In this context, Russian authorities announced floods caused by the collapse of the dam at the Kakhovka hydroelectric power station have forced the evacuation of more than 4,000 citizens on the left bank of the Dnieper River, occupied by Russian troops, and more than 1,900 on the right bank under Ukrainian control. About 2,700 houses in 15 settlements in the Kherson regions were flooded, local authorities told the Russian media. There are currently 14 settlements in the flooded area, and projections indicate that around 80 villages may be covered by water. In addition, the collapse of the dam has caused serious environmental damage, and some 100,000 hectares of arable land have been flooded. Meanwhile, the mayor of the town of Nova Kakhovka, where the dam is located, announced that pumping work will begin on Thursday to restore the complex. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić announced early parliamentary elections will be held in the country, but did not announce an exact date. In an address to the nation, the Serbian head of state said the vote will be held by the end of this year. The snap elections would mean voters will head to the polls for the third time in 4 years. President Vučić and his administration have been under pressure in recent weeks after 2 mass shootings in the national capital of Belgrade. In this sense, the opposition protesters have been demanding the resignations of senior government officials and the revocation of broadcasting licenses for 2 pro-government television networks which promote violence and glorify crime figures. In France on Wednesday, opposition parties confirmed they will file a motion of censure against the government after the Speaker of Parliament said she would block an attempt to repeal an unpopular pension reform raising the retirement age. Mathilde Panot, leader of the deputies of France Insoumise in the National Assembly, assured that they would be officially presenting next week the motion of censure seeking to defend parliamentary democracy in France.
All the left-wing coalition groups will present a motion of censure, which should be examined, I think, early next week, and discussions are still ongoing with Liat to see if they will submit it with us. In any case, it seems important to us to make it clear that we do not accept that parliamentary democracy and democracy as a whole should be flouted in this way.
On Thursday in France, a man armed with a knife attacked a group of preschool children playing by a lake in the French Alps, injuring 4 of them, 1 adult, and sending shockwaves across the country. The suspect is a Syrian man in his 30s who was granted refugee status in Sweden in April, a police source said. Witnesses described the suspected knife wielder running frantically, apparently attacking people at random before being gunned down by police near the shores of Lake Annecy. Annecy is a picturesque town in the French Alps near the Swiss border, popular among tourists and home to one of the world's most important animation festivals, which begins on Sunday. French President Emmanuel Macron has called it an attack of absolute cowardice. French Prime Minister condemned as unspeakable the knife attack in the French Alps and said to be shocked by this sinister.
Small children have been savagely attacked by an individual in a park. We are shocked by this despicable, unspeakable act. When children are victimized, I think we're all deeply hurt. And today our whole country is in shock. My first thoughts go out to the parents and to the children who are still in a serious condition and to the adults who were also injured. I would also like to pay tribute to the police who were able to intervene very quickly and apprehend the perpetrator. I would also like to thank the emergency services and the medical staff who immediately took care of the injured and who are still treating them. The inquiry will enable us to determine the background and profile of this assailant, and of course all the facts will have to come to light. But today is a time of emotion, and we are here with the Minister of the Interior alongside the people of Annecy to express the full support and solidarity of the nation.
teleSUR English continues to grow. You can now tune in from 33 different African countries through StarSat, dial 461 and enjoy Latin American alternative broadcasts. One final short break, we'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back from the South. At a meeting in Saudi Arabia on Thursday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced increased funding to support security and humanitarian conditions in regions vulnerable to exploitation by the Islamic State. Foreign ministers from the six-nation Gulf Cooperation Council, which includes Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, met in Riyadh as part of its anti-Islamic State agenda. Blinken said that although the Islamic State has been defeated in Iraq and Syria, present conditions can lead to instability, making the region vulnerable to a resurgence. He said the U.S. expects to raise over $600 million to address vulnerabilities that have been identified by people in Iraq and Syria regarding essential services, education, community reintegration, and accountability for crimes. Blinken also said the United States is committing $148.7 billion to that fund.
Since we came together in 2014, our coalition has grown into an 86-member force, bringing together countries and organizations from every part of the world. Together, we have achieved the territorial defeat of ISIS in Iraq and Syria. We've taken out or captured its leadership. We've prevented large-scale attacks, and we've invested billions in stabilizing liberated areas and rebuilding the region.
Syrian army units in cooperation with the Russian military eliminated 20 militants and destroyed 30 hideouts belonging to illegal armed groups during a special operation. In this sense, Deputy Chief of the Russian Center for Reconciliation of the Opposing Parties in Syria, Rear Admiral Oleg Gurinov, stated that as part of a special operation to find, block and neutralize terrorist groups operating in the southern provinces of the Syrian Arab Republic, joint detachments of the Syrian army in cooperation with the Russian military carried out reconnaissance and search operations in the northern and northeastern areas of the White Desert in the Homs province. Gurinov added that as a result of the operation, 20 militants, 9 arms and ammunition cache, and 30 hideouts of illegal armed groups were destroyed. In Sudan, 12 people have been killed and dozens injured in bombings over populated areas that the Rapid Support Forces have blamed on the country's army. According to the Rapid Support Forces, the army used air power and artillery on populated areas west of the city of Salaha, raising a number of casualties. Meanwhile, the warring parties are making contradictory statements about who's controlling facilities in the capital, while fires have been reported at the Yarmouk military compound and ammunition depots. Since the start of the conflict in Sudan, 860 people have been killed, according to official medical reports, and the United Nations reports over 1.3 million people displaced. The World Health Organization on Thursday declared an end to a nearly 4-month epidemic of Marburg virus in Equatorial Guinea. In a statement, the United Nations Health Agency declared the end of the outbreak of Marburg virus disease in Equatorial Guinea after no new cases were reported over the past 42 days, and the last patient was discharged from treatment. The Marburg virus, genetically linked to Ebola, had caused 35 confirmed or suspected deaths in the country. The highly virulent microbe causes severe fever, often accompanied by bleeding and organ failure. We have come to the end of this news briefing, and you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.